Okay, good morning. We're doing Hilchas Shchita. We just completed Siman Gimel. Before we start Siman Dalet today, though, I do want to go back just a bit, to clarify something and a couple just fundamental topics. Okay, so just to clarify, if confusing, a mumar la'arel, a person who doesn't do a bris milah on himself. He's afraid, he doesn't want to. Okay. So then, can he get Kabbalah? Can he be a shochet? So from what we know, there's no reason whatsoever. He can certainly be a shochet. However, it depends. If he had at least two older brothers, or if it's for his child, also two older sons, that were not able to, that died. And so since they died, he's not supposed to do a bris milah. So that's the difference. The difference between if he chooses not to, or it's because two older siblings died, so the difference is if you have to check the sakin, if you have to check the knife for him. Can you trust him? We pass like the Rambam, who says he cannot check himself. If it's mumar la'arel, then someone else has to check for him. So that's the nafkamina. And again, just a quick thing for chazaka, we're always familiar. Chazaka is how many times? 3. But for pikuach nefesh, it's 2. Okay. And somebody asked me, what happens if you have a shochet and he gets caught with watching something inappropriately on some device, a smartphone or computer? So can you eat his shechita? So as far as we know, 100% kosher, no problem. Even to check the knife, right? We're assuming it's just a mumar l'teyavon, and it's a question for the Rav HaMachshir to take away or not take away his Kabbalah or his position, but certainly once it's done, there's no problem with the meat itself. And now this was brought up yesterday. How many times do you need to be established that you got caught doing something to turn you into a mumar lahachis or mumar le-teyavon? So the Shach in Siv Katan Yutet says clearly for a mumar le-teyavon, you have to be muad, and you has to be done at least, you have to be caught at least 3 times. 1 time is enough that could make you pasal le'edos, but to make you a mumar le-teyavon, you have to be muad 3 times. That's brought down in the Kaf HaChaim and others. However, he quotes the Maharshal. Again, I'm not sure if everyone agrees or not, but he does quote the Maharshal for a mumar l'hachis. All you need is 1. So, I don't know, tzarachiyun. And Shach also points out that a mumar l'hachis, once he's established as a mumar l'hachis, his whatever he shechs is pasal on a deraisa level, and it's in nevela midaraisa. And he says that's pretty clear from a slew of Rishonim, Rosh, Rambam, and others. It's a nevela deraisa. He doesn't say that by a mumar l'tiyavon, because the whole concept is very different. A mumar l'tiyavon is just, you're a mumar for this issue. But a mumar l'hachis, it takes you away and it makes you not like a regular Jew, and it makes you like an akum, it's a din daraisa, and therefore you're no longer in the category of a bar zvicha. Torah says v'zavachta v'achalta.
But he can still make kiddushin.
Can he still? He can't make kiddushin. As far as I know, he cannot make kiddushin. We'll discuss. Okay. If you're mahar b'tshuva, okay. So okay, that's true. I'm saying because we're not sure. Okay. Next interesting thing, just to clarify, this was maybe unclear, probably was. Okay, in order to become a mumar, can you become mumar on a mitzvah daraisa or a mitzvah darabanan and an aseh versus lo taseh? So the halacha seems to be, it's in the Kaf HaChaim, and he quotes numerous achronim. He doesn't quote anyone who argues, and he says you can only become a mumar for these halachas that we're talking about if a person violates an iser de'araisa. It has to be an iser de'araisa. And most say even by an iser aseh, like if he doesn't want to take a lulav or tefillin derech lahachis. So that might, again, it depends on the situation, obviously, and sometimes people will take it one day and not take another day. So you have to be careful to categorize them as lahachis. But anyway, so many say it applies to both a lav and an aseh. It seems that Rashi probably says it's only by a lav, not an aseh. Okay? And when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos, it's a little bit different again, because we're not making you a mumar necessarily. There's a special din, and it might be only derabanan. It's mechalel Shabbos befarhesia. So there, he quotes the Kaf HaChaim. Many say it's only by an iser daraisa, but there is an opinion, perhaps the Bir Halacha says even by Yisuri derabanan, because he's could still be categorized as mechalel Shabbos befarhesia, and it's a pagamin in his whole keeping of Shabbos. And there is an opinion, maybe Das Yachid, he quotes in the Kaf HaChaim, that you're only a mumar even for Shabbos if you violate an iser daraisa that you get a chiyuv of misa based in. But that's even just not just a regular lav wouldn't be enough, and that's why they always have the example of Avodah Zarah, of Nisa Chayayin, but that's Das Yachid, I think. Okay, one more interesting thing. We spoke about in Siman Gimel that you don't need intention for shchita, right? But we did say that you do need to have koach gavra. There has to be a physical force using your hands, and so again, the Kaf HaChaim, Simla Chadasha, Ziv Chetzedek, Pri Megadim, they all say that if you're holding a knife and you just open up your hands, you open up your fingers and it drops, they say that's not called Koach Gavra. So that might be, there may be a machlokas out there, I'll just leave that as a disclaimer, but we're going to talk about soon about Hasarat HaMonea. But that's a little bit different because you're moving your hand to allow the water to come. Here you're just opening up your hands, and all the work is really being done through gravity. So, okay, there may or may not be a machlokas on the matter, but I did not find anything besides.
Something should be clear about it, right?
Who? The Machaber is not so clear. Machaber is definitely not clear.
As opposed to,
Depends how you read the Machaber.
Peel,
Right.
peel versus nafla.
So it depends how you define or explain nafla and hipil. It's not clear, but you're right. You can read it either way.
Is it about kavanah or is it about gravity?
Well, we know you don't need kavana, but you do need to have some. You do need to have some koach gavra. The question, and you're using a physical force to open up your hand, but is that called the physical force of pushing the knife? So they say it's.
If you open the faucet.
So that's hasarat hamanea. So again, we're going to get to that real soon. So I don't want to digress too much. We're going to get to it, but you're physically moving your hand to allow the water to come. Here, but you're using your force to allow the water to come. So that's koach gavra. Here, you're just opening up your fingers, and so the force of the knife is purely gravity once you move your hands.
So if you have a knife
and you move something
and the knife falls down,
that we'll see that is koach gavra. That's why we're going to see that. Okay, that's coming up. Okay, one important topic that we went over real quick. Again, very fundamental, and usually go a little quicker. But this is on the whole issue of, we're all familiar with the phrase of Tinok Shenishba, Lebein Hagoyim. Okay, So we learned, this is a major siman we just learned about a mumar, and it has tremendous ramifications. For example, shchita, edus, you count them for a minyan, stam yanam, yainesach, kiddushin, as we mentioned, bishul akum, malin velo or moridim. Do you want to keep them alive or not? For tzivilas kelim. It matters for Hashava Seveda, for Eruvin, Halvaya, for Halva, with Ribbis. So all these halachas, it's really, so I just want to say over a few main points, because it really applies to everything. So we learned that a person who is a mumar, right, we see that they're doing mumar lahachis, they're completely not from, and machal Shabbos befresia. So we basically understand at this point that very possibly on a din deraisa, especially by a mumar lahachis, maybe only on a derabanan by Shabbos. That's quite well, okay. But certainly the person has a din of a goy, right? For essentially all the halachos, bein lakula, bein lachumra, but it depends a little bit maybe for each halacha, but just in general. Okay, so now we have nowadays this concept, we're all familiar with Tinok Shenishba. Somebody grows up and he doesn't know any better. Right? He grows up, his parents are not from, or the whole atmosphere in the world or in a city or in a synagogue is not to be from. So what's the din? So it's just interesting. The way we talk about a Tinok Shenishba doesn't exist in Chazal. As far as I know, the only place it's mentioned in the Gemara is, it's mentioned in the Gemara in Masachet Shabbos, Perek Zayin, Daf Samech Chet. There, the discussion is an actual physical Tinok Shenishba. A baby is kidnapped and he's brought up among the non-Jews. The Gemara is not talking about someone who has, non-from parents. The community is not from. That's not the discussion. I'm not saying it's the same or not, but just to know the context of how it starts. And so that's the only sugya there. And the sugya there is discussing, is he chayav a korban chatas for doing an Isser Deraisa on Shabbos? The question is, do we consider him as a shogeg, or do we consider him as an onus completely? A shogeg, in other words, we treat him like as if he once found out and then forgot, or do we treat him like he never knew about it at all? So there's machlokas Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel says he is chayav. We consider him a shogeg. He's chayav one chatas, even though he didn't know any better, and that's what the Rambam paskins like. And Yochas Shkagos. Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish says he's pater legamrei because he's like an anus. Okay, so that's Tinok Shenishba. That's in the Gemara. Then the first one that I know. The first case that I don't know if it talks about it. The first case that I know that's among the Rishonim that I was able to find was the Rambam, famous Rambam, and there he discusses in Mamrim, Gimel, where he talks about Kofrim, in particular Torah Shebal Peh, Apikorsim, Mumrim, and V'chulei, that they're not Bichlal Yisrael, and they're Dinam Ke'akum, and it may even apply of not Malin and V'chulei. So there he discusses it, and he says that he says this only applies by somebody who was kafar b'Torah. He knew about the Torah, and even then he went against it. That's the time that the Torah says you get this halacha that he's like a non-Jew. However, he says, but Tinok Shenishba leben agoyim harei kanus. Anybody who grew up among the families, the community, they're all heretics, they're all kofrim. So he says they have a din of Tinok Shenishba. So the way we talk about a Tinok Shenishba, the famous lakula, that's the Rambam, as far as I know, is the first, and he says that that's what applies to the Karayim. The Karayim only have a din of Tinok Shenishba. Okay, and the Beis Yosef paskins like the Rambam, and we're going to get there, and later on in Yoreh by Ribbis, that they have a din as a Jew, someone who's the Karayim. and therefore you're not allowed to, they don't have a din of a goy, and you're not allowed to give them loans beribis. He quotes in the Beis Yosef the Nimukei Yosef, who argues, but he sides with the Rambam. Now the Radbaz more or less agrees with the Rambam, but he says Lamaisa, it totally depends on the situation, depends on the generation, depends on the person, depends if these people knew, didn't know how they treat the Chachamim. So it's qualifies it, which is probably the most. Anyways, let's keep reading. But the Radbaz is very, and the Rambam are very much followed. The Binyan Sion is the first posek among the later Achronim, or among the Achronim, that's famous for discussing it in around the 1860s. It's Rav Yaakov Ettlinger, right? Also the author of the Aruch Laner. So he discusses the case. There's Machale Shabbos Befarhesia, that's his case, and they're touching Stam Yenam. The question is it Asr or not? So he says it's good to be Machmir, right? Tavo alav bracha, but he says Yesh amal ismach, if you want to be Mekel, to treat them like a Tinok Shenishba. So the Binyan Sion is the most famous among modern, among the Achronim. And following the Psak of the Binyan Sion, so Rav Chaim Ozer Gudzinski, also the Av Beis Din of the Vilna, he was matir and aguna based on this. So he allowed the edim on the get, even though they were Machale Shabbos Befarhesia. And those were the ones that signed on the get. He allowed they allowed them to use it in order to b'makom igun, in order to avoid that. Okay, now back to you're using them. You're allowing her to now remarry. Eish ish. Lakula. We're treating them like a real Tinok Shenishba. Then, for more modern day poskim, so the Chazon Ish is very famous for being Mekel as well. And he says the non-religious nowadays, he's in particular probably referring to Eretz Yisrael, they all have a din, at least in general, Tinok Shenishba. Right? Because they lack education, the whole environment is completely secular, all their surroundings. And he also points out there's no Gilui Shechina, there's no Baskol, there's no Hashras Hashchina. Okay, so it's Chazon Ish is known to treat them as Tinok Shenishba. However, not 100% clear. The Chut Hashani explains that really the Chazon Ish felt that they were a suffix, and therefore you have to be it's only lahachmer and not lahakel. So it depends on which among the slew of halachos. It depends. Now some also say the times changed a little bit between now and the Chazon Ish. Okay, so. But for sure, the Chazon Ish was very clear. No one can argue on this one, that his point was that you still have to love the Chilonim, and you have to still try to be Makari of them, and you still have to try and talk with them nicely, and there's still no din of Moridim, because there's no Gilui Shechina, there's no Ashkachas Hashem, and nowadays, there isn't anyone Sheodea to give proper tochacha, and you should still give them an aliyah. It seems more or less, but again, obviously, everyone can take the Chazon Ish a little bit this way and that way, and but also let me explain. This also reminds us of the Radbaz. He does write in Hilchos Eruvin as well. It's in Pei Zayin Daled, Yud Daled, that it's mashma even over there. It's very clear. It's mashma even lakula. But he does write, and maybe that's what the Chut Hashani wants to say, it really does depend on each individual. Because everyone has their own upbringing, and everyone comes from a different place. But just, all right. Now, so that was the Chazon Ish. Now, many others follow also Lakula, based on the Binyan Sion, Chazon Ish, which really is coming from the Rambam and the Radbaz. So Rav Chaim Kanievsky or Steinman, of course we know the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rav Edelstein, Rav Avodah Yosef, Mordechai Eliyahu, Rav Avram Yitzchak Cohen Cook. They're all on the more lenient side to call them Tinok Shenishba. Now, on the opposite opinion, again, everything depends a little bit with a grain of salt, and every Rav is a little different, and every situation is a little different, but in general, Rav Elyashiv, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Rav Shmuel Rosner, Yaskil Avdi, Rav Kapach, they are all said that no, nowadays they are exposed to Yiddishkeit, they can ask, they see from Yidden, and therefore they do have a din of a mumar, and they don't, and they're not B'chal Yisrael, and they're not Tinok Shenishba. But again, it obviously depends a little bit on each individual case. Okay. Rav Moshe and Evan Ezer, Aleph, Pei Beis Yud Aleph, he writes, it really depends a lot on the parents and their upbringing. But he's, in general, you would say if the parents were from, and then the kid decided to rebel, so then they would often be considered not Tinok Shenishba, because their parents, the community, okay. So it depends on the situation. Rav Aaron Soloveitchik visits also, he says, if the normal person in a conservative shul, the average Joe Schmo, is Tinok Shenishba, but not the rabbi. The rabbi knows a lot better. And right. I mean, some also point out, it really depends. In some of the kibbutzim, they don't know anything. And in some of the kibbutzim, no, they dafka teach them everything about Yiddishkeit to teach them how to be kofrin. That's what some write. So Rav Kapach wrote that. So it depends on the situation. And Rav Kook said,
that might make it more Tinok
well, it depends. Okay, can go either way, exactly. So Rav Kook says it's that for sure there are nusim gemurim and chalila lanu ladun ones kiratzon, and the whole atmosphere in the world is, and some say even if somebody was from and then became less from or rebelled, could still be called Tinok Shenishba, because I'm not sure, so I'm not going to quote them, but the point is the whole atmosphere and the whole ruach and the whole lack of hashkacha. Well, sometimes we see hashkacha pratis, but at the same time we often don't. So it's all right. So that's in a nutshell, just to get a good feel for that topic. And I saw a video clip of Edelstein, but I think everyone says it. When it comes to your own, often it's to everybody, but certainly with your own children, you still have to love them, talk to them, dress them, clothe them, give them gifts. Even if they're not going to wear the most tznius clothing, you still, that's our obligation, and you have no choice. There's no other way. You're only going to distance them more. So, mikol et stadim, that's really the only way to deal with such a case. Okay, let me read one halacha and then we'll stop. I didn't get too far. Siman Daled. Let's at least start. Aleph. Hashochet l'shem elilim or l'shem davar acher ma dina. Okay, we'll finish next tomorrow. But here, Aleph. Hashochet l'shem avodas elilim. A person who is shechtin l'shem avodas elilim. For avodah zarah. Afilu lo chishev la'avda b'shchita zo. Even if he's not, the shchita itself is for avodah zarah, we're going to explain. But the shchita itself could be the etzem avoda itself, or it could be just a hechsher for the avoda. Either way, you're doing it for avodah zarah. Okay. Or, so it's either mamish for the shchita, when the shchita is the avodah zarah, or even if it's not, but it's for using the animal for avodah zarah. You're going to use the blood to throw. I'm not sure if there's a minimum. O lahaktir chelba, or you're going to burn the chelev la'avodas ililim for the avodah zarah. Okay, so then hareza zivchei meitim. Either way, it has a din of zivchei meisim, and it's aser behana, and it's aser 100% behana.
It sounds like the Mechaber is trying to exclude
No, he's
He's
adding
showing
both.
that it's
Both cases, it's aser, it's 100% aser, and even, no, that's the next case, okay? And let me just, from the Shach, he just points out, it's, the Shach holds, again, it depends. No, this is also, no, never mind. That's in the next Seif. Yeah, so I think we're done today and we will continue back tomorrow.
Yours, Mechaber is just saying